And we're live. And we're live. Took a bit, but we're live. Welcome to you, the viewer. Welcome to our fantastic panel off on the side. It's the After Dram, and it means it's time to unwind. So put your feet up, grab a dram, and or a cocktail, and or two. It's up to you, and relax. As a quick recap to our early afternoon, we have Kent and Nick and I and David on the side and Cheryl on the side have done a deep dive into the first quarter of Whisky Island, A Portrait of Isla, and its whiskeys with the author, Andrew Jefford. And it was fun. It was educational. It was fantastic. He brought us through so much. There he is right there. Let's have another round of introductions really, really quickly. And here's Dave. He's here. So I'm going to click him on the screen. We can't not have Dave because he's been with us for the very first time we did the Whiskey Book Club 10 books ago. So Dave, I'm putting you on the spot immediately. What do you have in your glass, buddy?
It's actually empty because I drank it during the last one. I was so pissed off, but
see. Which one you got?
Oh, nice.
Beautiful one. Good for you, Dave.
One of my favorites. Yep.
That's my introduction to Ardbeg and my introduction to Pete.
Pete itself. Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Great place to start.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi. Good to see you, Dave.
I'm sorry I'm late, but technology and old people don't get along.
Yeah, tell me. I know all about it.
Yeah. See, yeah, he's all flustered because, it's hi, it's Dave.
Thank you very much.
Dave from the basement again.
Okay. And
sorry,
hold
Dave.
it. Before we get going, I picked up the book the wrong way when you said witch. That looks like an old lady knitting.
Okay. I hadn't seen it like that before. That's cool.
Yeah. And my girlfriend asked me, how's the book going? I said, I think I've got a travel book here. But I said, it's like a mystery novel. I want to turn the page to see what's coming next. I got to keep going. So yeah, I'm having a lot of fun.
Excellent.
Yeah. Good.
I'm happy to hear that.
Good. So I'm looking for something else to drink.
Yeah, I think Dolph is having some technical issues himself. He's got this frozen grin. Oh, there he is. He's coming back. Anyways, my name's Kent. I go by Whisky Island, and I've switched it up to a little bit of a grooves, which it was very interesting going into this a couple of years back, and coming from Dark Cove and stuff like that. The grooves is not a typical Ardbeg, but we absolutely love it, and it makes wonderful cocktails.
Excellent. And Nick, you still drinking out of your rabbit ears?
I finished my rabbit ears for the drink. I'm nibbling on the chocolate now because I need to do some errands after book club. So got to keep it reasonable to go out to drive. Mm-hmm. So it's whiskey infused rabbit ears now.
Nice. I don't have to. I'm drinking Ouya again, so more cast strength, and Laura will drive me, my lovely wife, anywhere we want to go after this. It's probably just walking the dogs anyway, so that's very good. Let's start because we've talked about Terroir several times. It's a point of contention, but I really wanted to come back to this with Andrew because of his background in the wine industry and his ability to bring us somewhere that maybe we haven't been before as a group panel. So let's we're going to throw this out there. No, Andrew, sorry, you were supposed to be the very last one to introduce yourself, so my fault. So I'll have you introduce yourself and then I'll get back on my horse.
Okay, well, good to be with you, everybody. My name's Andrew Jefford. I'm the author of Whisky Island. Great to talk about it. I'm talking to you from the south of France, which is where I live with my family. Been here for 11 or 12 years now. Long while since I wrote Whisky Island. First of all, it came out in 2004 as Peat, Smoke and Spirit. But Nick's got a copy there. Well footnoted, I see. And that's the reason why I got Dave Broom to write the foreword to Whisky Island, to bring the whole book up to date. And point out all of the changes. Second half now, I'm going to this is the whiskey I'm going to try. You probably can't see the label. Anyway, it's called the Jefford Brothers. It's when I was writing the book, I bought a cask of Bruichladdich, and my brother Steve did as well. They were both ex-Ichem casks, and Steve got his bottled up a couple of years ago. His was unpeated Bruichladdich. Mine was Port Charlotte. So I'm going to have a little bit of the one that he got, and he had bottled up a few years ago. So I'm on to Bruichladdich now, but I don't have so many whiskies here at the moment, unfortunately.
I'm very envious.
Hard to come by in the south of France.
Okay. Well, we've got to get you some then. We can do that. We have enough whiskey as a group to be able to do that for you. Andrew, do you have your own bottle coming in a couple of years? Are you waiting and just taking your time in the barrel? Is that what's going on with yours?
You know, this is an interesting story. I tried these whiskies from cask when I was traveling the island, actually after I wrote the book.
Okay.
And not everything goes well with single casks. These were heavily sulfured casks when they arrived. Now, either they were too heavily sulfured when they left Ichem in Sauternes, or they weren't really adequately cleaned and desulfured when they arrived at Bruichladdich.
Okay.
And they were still showing a lot of sulfur on them. And in fact, this is my brother's one. I'm still getting quite a lot of sulfury notes off the nose of that too. And so I decided not to have mine bottled, and I traded it on. So I've now traded it on. It went off to Taiwan, in fact, through a friend who trades whiskey casks. Nice. It was a shame because it should have been a wonderful, wonderful prospect. But you know, that's an issue with single casks. Not every single cask is a great cask.
It also shows you the importance of wood management.
Once again, Kent?
It shows you the importance of wood management as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, did he sell it as a single cask, do you think?
Well, you mean my cask?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I sold it through a friend of mine, a Chinese friend of mine who used to trade whiskey casks out to the Far East.
Okay.
And I think she did sell it as a single cask, but whether it gets bottled up as a single cask or whether it gets, you know, used in some blend or other, I absolutely have no idea. You know, I didn't want to pull a fast one. Anybody could have taken a sample off it, and, you know, I was completely honest about why I didn't want to have it bottled myself, but that was the case. I sort of advised my brother not to bottle it as well, but he was very keen to have something like that, so he wanted to bottle it anyway.
Actually, I want to just pop in with a question that sort of came up reading the book, speaking about casks. I did not realize that they rejuvenate sherry casks the way that you described in the book. I'm like, okay, we're used to hearing about them recharring, rescraping a cask, but rejuvenating a sherry cask, that was like, oh, wow.
Yeah. Sherry casks are, of course, you know, much more expensive than ex-bourbon casks. So the more juice you can get out of it, the better. The more life you can get out of it, the better.
And that is STR. It is shaved and retoasted and charred as well, right? With the sherry cask, they're doing that just like they do the bourbon ones. Was there a different process?
Well, you know, I would imagine if you're going to properly rejuvenate a sherry cask, you need to re-sherry it. That's the whole point with a sherry cask. So you would have to shave it and then send it back to Jerez for further sherry aging.
Okay.
But that's a big trade anyway. I mean, that's kind of well set up. So, yeah. But, you know, because everything is done with secondhand casks, there are no completely standard practices here. So you would need to speak. If somebody spoke about a rejuvenated sherry cask, you would need to ask them actually what they meant by that.
Okay.
Because practices might well differ.
I've heard a lot of the guys just put sherry back into it, age that again, and then dump it, and there you go. You got a new sherry cask. And
the sherry producers get paid quite well to do that. You know, they can make some money like that.
And we had another author on that was telling us that the casks themselves will hold 4 to 8 liters of the previous liquid in it. So I'm wondering if sherry would be the same thing. Is that going to hold the 4 to 8 if it's redone, or if that's just initial? That's a neat question.
You mean buried in the pores of the wood?
Correct. So it's another way of actually introducing another spirit into yours. So it's a way of blending, I guess, is how he explained it. And
the answer is probably more, because they're bigger casks.
250 liters, right. 250 liter casks.
Or is it 500?
500s. Sherry butts are 500.
Sherry butt.
Yeah. We've been buying 250s, and they come with sherry in them. And you can.
Well, you can have other things sherried, of course, by order. But the sherry butt is traditionally 500 liters.
And Andrew, we didn't tell you this before. Yukon Dave, he works for a distillery here as well in Canada. So 2 breweries. Okay. And they focused on beer for the longest time, and their oldest whiskey is, Dave, is it 11 or 12? 12 years old now. So they've been at it for a long time for the new micro distilleries here in Canada. They're among the oldest. So, and Dave's a good friend, and he hooks us up with a lot of really good whiskey. So,
and interesting, we're actually last week we shipped two different whiskeys to France.
Okay, great.
So they went on the truck to Montreal, and then they're on the boat to France in a couple of weeks.
Any place in particular?
What's that?
Any place in particular?
I didn't get any details, because now because of Andrew, I can get some details. Yeah.
Good. All right. Let's go back to it. Just I'll throw the one question out. So, and I want to click on Broom, because I like hearing Broom. So there's Broom's quote. Broom completes his forward with on page 17. There's a thing called terroir. It's often thought to refer solely to the impact of soil and climate on flavor, but terroir is also about people, history, and culture. It's about how, when all these elements are combined, a deep sense of place come into being. Andrew realized that when he wrote this book. So, Andrew, did you realize this? And Andrew, with your wine background, I'd absolutely love to hear what you have to tell us about terroir and your perspective in the whiskey world as compared to the wine world. The floor is yours, kind sir.
Okay. Well, I was very happy that Dave wrote what he did, because I think he's got it about right. Maybe it's important to begin this by saying that in the wine world too, the people are a very important part of terroir and the local culture. If you think about somewhere like Burgundy, you had this very special slope called the Côte d'Or, an escarpment slope facing east, or southeast as well. And it's really on that escarpment slope that all the greatest Burgundies are produced. But if you think back 9,000, 10,000 years, it was just forest, completely primeval forest, nothing differentiated about it. And all the greatest vineyards in the midpoint of the slope, Romani Conti and Latache and so on, all the famous names, were just parts of the forest with all the other vineyards, the Premier Cru and the village wines as well. So terroir didn't exist back then, except as a potential. But in order to have that potential, to realize that potential, you always have to have the human catalyst. Yep. The human catalyst makes terroir, because without the human catalyst, it doesn't really exist. It's only some kind of theoretical concept, and there would be no reason actually to come up with such a concept unless you actually, as it were, know by experience what that place can actually give you. So even with wine, the human input is very, very important. Now, when you come to compare whiskey and wine, there are some very, very significant differences. Mm-hmm. Wine is fermented grape juice. I mean, a grape is a fruit, it's a juicy fruit. And you press the juice out of the fruit and you ferment that juice, and then you drink the fermented juice. And that's a fairly simple, in effect, one-stage process. Okay, it can go on to several, you can further the stages with aging processes. But if you take a simple glass of Chablis, that's what it is. It's grapes grown in Chablis, in this place called Chablis, circumscribed zone or area, juice pressed out of them, fermented in a stainless steel tank, quite cool, and aged in the tank for 3 or 4 months and then bottled. And what you drink is the fermented juice from that place.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at whiskey, I mean, okay, we have to start distinguishing between blends and malts. But even with most malts, you're a long way from that concept. You're many multiples different from the actual concept itself. And also what you're starting with is very different. You're starting with a seed. You're not starting with a fruit. There's no juice in a barley grain.
No.
There's just starch. And as I said a little bit earlier, the starch is no good to you until you can actually malt it and turn it into fermentable sugars. Then you have to turn it into, in effect, a beer. And then you have to ferment the beer. And then you take the beer and then you double distill it. 2 different distillery processes. And then you age it, and for quite a long time too, in a variety of second-hand containers, which imprint their own character on the spirit. And in most cases, the barley is sourced from pretty much anywhere. I mean, maybe most of it comes from Scotland somewhere or other, but it doesn't come from the locality, and it could come from much further afield. Whether or not it has, peat smoke in the malting process is a kind of recipe decision. The water itself, when you speak to whiskey experts, doesn't really count for terribly much. 2 to 3% is what they generally say, maybe 5%. I always used to look at that very peaty water you get coming out of the tap on Islay and think, well, it must have some effect, mustn't it? And it must, but the effect is relatively slight. The effect of water, actually, and what you're in the terroir impact of what you're drinking is much more significant when you drink beer than it is when you drink whiskey. Whiskey, after all, distillation is a process of water exclusion. So when you put all of these things together, I mean, the way I like to look at it is that wherever you talk about terroir, you're talking about 2 things. You're talking about place and work.
Yep.
That's true of wine, just as it's true of whiskey. But in wine, perhaps there is more place than work, in our Chablis example, for example, because there has been very little work done on it. It's a simple transformation which has happened quite swiftly. But when you come to look at whiskey, there's much more work than place, because it's a multi-stage, multi-level transformation of the original product, and because the original product is very different anyway. So to me, yes, I mean, there is terroir in whiskey, but it's much more to do with the work than the place. And in wine, in some cases, not in every case, it's more to do with the place than the work. So yes, there is terroir, but you have to define it with a whiskey definition. By the way, if you're interested in seeing this as a debate argued out on paper, I did fairly recently write a piece about this for a magazine called Club Œnologique. Club Œnologique, that's spelled C-L-U-B, and then Œnologique is O-E-N-O-L-I-G-I-Q-U-E. And if you Google Jefford Terroir Whiskey Club Œnologique, you will see my article come up. And I referenced Mark Rainier and his work in that article. Now, those of you, have you ever had Mark Rainier on your show, Dolph, yet?
No, we haven't.
Okay, well, one day I'm sure you will. He'd be delighted to do it. Mark is a very combative guy, and Mark has written a kind of, well, what can I say, vituperative, incensed reply to this article. And so if you also Google Rainier Whiskey Terroir Club Œnologique, you will get his reply to my initial article. We can nuance this debate a little bit. Some of the things he was accusing me of in the article, I wasn't actually advancing, and there's some backstories to it as well. But anyway, it's a lot of fun to read these kind of debates. So who cares? It's a debate worth having, and there we are. But that's yeah, sure.
I've heard like terroir has been used; it's been the key one. But I'm hearing provenance thrown out a lot, and that's got more of an alt art cultural background to it. And then the other one I just heard was Dualchas, Dualchas, which is a Gaelic for culture, tradition, heritage, and character.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I like the sound of that. That's the first time I've come across that word. So I'd be interested to see some references on that and look up some stuff on that. But I like the sound of that. Provenance. Yeah, provenance covers lots of things. I mean, very often when you say provenance to people in the drinks sphere, you're talking about authenticity of bottles and that kind of thing. But yes, provenance can also have a sense of, derived from the place. And so, yes, that could go back to what we're talking about. But I think what I would always stress is you can talk about terroir with whiskey, but you mean chiefly activities in a place rather than the physical impact of the place on the raw materials and the way in which you can taste that in the final product.
I have to say that's probably the best explanation of terroir that I've heard. We've heard a lot of different sides of this. Yep. And I would almost wish Robin Robinson was here right now, but that would be a show for another day.
And Robin was completely against the concept of and you know what, most whiskey people we've met are completely against the thought of terroir within whiskey, and their response generally is if there is, it's in the marketing department and nowhere else. But I like it, and it's a great conversational piece because it does bring things up, and it does bring up this one right here, and I like what you wrote. So, what is water's effect on the character of the spirit? Douglas Murray of Diageo, the Scotch whiskey giant, which owns both Lag and Caol as well as Port Ellen malting, sums up in the general industry view. On a scale of 1 to 100, I would rate it at between 1 and 2. I love that because you're waiting for like 7, 8, 80, something like that. But no, it rates 1 or 2 out of 100. It means nothing. Andrew, you obviously agree with this, but I'd like to know if the importance of water is a marketing focus as well in wine. Now, does it have more of an effect in wine? Because we're not as voiced in wine as you are, obviously, or at all. So let's hear a bit.
Okay, well, 2 parts to your question, Dolph. So I'll start with the first part. You say I obviously agree.
Oh,
I think I would nuance that by saying I have no reason to disagree.
Okay.
Because he's the expert and I'm not. And I'm sure they've looked into these things in a very scientific manner. And I have huge respect for science. Science is truth. So if they've established that scientifically, I'm happy to go with that. And as I said a little earlier, distillation is a process of water exclusion. So what you're trying to do is remove the water from this thing you've made in the first place. You needed to have the water in order to produce your basic alcohol, but after that, you're trying to remove it. So I've got no reason to disagree with that. A question about wine: water is zero in wine. Water has no business in wine at all. I mean, sometimes in California, when they, get their grapes back to the winery and they find that it's going to turn into a wine of 16.5% alcohol, some adding of water goes on. And the same thing in Australia. I'm not sure it's actually legal to do so. It may make a better product, maybe not. I don't know. Got no particular view on that. But in principle, water plays no role whatsoever in winemaking, because what you're drinking is the juice of the grape and nothing but, ideally. So,
and that's not influenced by soft water, hard water, the different rock.
Not at all. The only area in which it begins to play a role is whether you irrigate or not. And there's quite a lively debate about that in wine circles. Should you irrigate? Should you not irrigate?
Because it
obviously
stresses the vine more, or doesn't stress the vine more. Is that the general concept?
Well, if you can not irrigate, it's best not to irrigate. for the simple reason that then the roots descend most deeply to look for the moisture. And then the theory is that they will get most exposure to the mineral spectrum that you find in the soil, and that in some generally unspecified way is good for wine. All of that said, you know, you never say if you completely banned irrigation and said no, you know, wine vineyards should never be irrigated, you wouldn't have any Argentinian wine. And there are some terrific Argentinian wines, so that would be an awful shame. Okay. Argentinian wines only exist by, well, those produced in Mendoza, which is the by far the largest part of Argentinian wine business. They have to be irrigated because the place is a desert. So if they weren't, you'd end up with a dead vineyard. So there is a case for irrigation if you have to do it, and you can irrigate. You know, there's something called a deficit irrigation, which is sort of reproducing the effect of sparse rain on the vineyard and so on, and that's fine. But the drink where water is really incredibly important is beer, and you can make a very, very good case for terroir in beer because of water. And notably, I'm thinking of Burton-upon-Trent, which is the classic source of, you know, India Pale Ale. That's where IPAs came into being. And it was a fantastic brewing town because there are gypsum beds underneath the town. So the water filters up through these gypsum beds, which gave you a fantastic brewing water to make these what were originally rather high-strength beers, which are going to be exported all the way across the sea and across the, well, not necessarily across the equator, to India. So that was, you know, great brewing water because of the presence of the gypsum beds. To the extent that, you know, brewers who want to reproduce the authentic IPA will often Burtonize their water. In other words, reproduce the mineral spectrum that the water coming up through the gypsum beds in Burton-upon-Trent would have had in order to best reproduce the brewing water for IPA.
Okay.
So, yes, I mean, you could make quite a good case that water is an important terroir factor where terroir exists, or where terroir might be argued to exist in beer production. But the moment you move away from beer, you move away from the importance of water. But perhaps there is a final part to your question, Dolph, which we could also address. And you mentioned the sort of the wonderful marketing images of the water tumbling down from the wild loch. And indeed, in my book, you know, I walked to the wild water source in every case for the big Seven Isle distilleries. That was a great pleasure to do. It meant a lot to me. Okay, maybe maybe those peaty waters only account for 2% of the flavor. But remember what I said about work before place in the terroir print of whiskey. You know, that is an important part of the work of the place. You're gathering the water from the sky. You're pooling it. It is wild water. It's coming down to the distillery, and you're using that to distill your spirit. Yep. And as a concept, as an idea, as a notion, as a comforting and inspiring thing to think about, that's very significant. So, okay, it's only 2% of the flavor. But in terms of the way in which we appreciate and enjoy the spirit, maybe it's 10 or 15%. And those two can coexist with each other. They're just different things, and you have to think about them in a different way. But whenever I lie in bed at night thinking about Islay whiskey, as I quite often do, because it's a wonderful place it's a wonderful calming thing to think about, you know, all those places you've been to on Islay. You know, very often I'm thinking about water sources and wild water and lochs and the loneliness of lochs and the sounds up by the lochs and so on.
No rest for the wicked, Andrew. No rest for the wicked.
It's very inspiring, and it's part of the pleasure. So it's part of the place in that sense. So it is significant.
Nice. Okay. Thank you. Dave, you're muted, buddy.
Again. Andrew, you made me look at terroir totally different now, because all I ever saw was a field with the guys getting the malt in, bringing it in, and distilling. I think, well, how does that go through the still, which is mechanical? But when you start talking about people and history and that kind of stuff, that's the part I love. Like the mechanical process, it's really interesting, but I love the history. So, yeah, you've changed the way I look at that.
And remember, that is important for wine too, Dave. It's not just, it's important.
Well, and I'm a beer historian. Somehow I ended up in whiskey, and I'm enjoying the hell out of it. But I love the old stories of the breweries and the people and just what was going on. Something else you said, I thought, I'm going to steal this, if you don't mind. You said science is truth. I'm going to use that all those COVIDiots I talk to every once in a while. And just throw that out to them, and that's the end of the conversation. I said, I believe in science. So
I wish that was the end of the conversation, Dave, but I'm afraid that there's no end to that conversation with people.
You can't talk to those people. So yeah. Thank you for that. Right.
So Nick, are we satisfied with the tap wall? We can put this to bed now for a little while? Or should we still just plug away with everybody else? I'm wondering, because we do.
Keep plugging, huh?
Okay. Oh, sorry. There was one question. Cheryl wanted to know the spelling of your article again. I'll just put it on the side.
I've got it half-assed here.
Okay. Right. Well, Jefford is easy. Terroir is easy. Whiskey is easy. The difficult bit is this magazine title. It's called Club. Club is easy. And then the other word is enologique, which is spelled OENOLOGIQUE.
I wasn't even
close. But I think if you just put CO, it would probably get you there.
And hopefully I spelled it properly. I'm not sure. I might not have. Well, I think Cheryl already got it up there. She looked it up.
It could be.
I'm sure she did. Well, anyways.
Great. And,
for that up,
the response to your article was by.
And this response was by, what's his last name? Rayner?
Mark Renier.
Mark Renier. R-E-Y-N-I-E-R.
Monsieur Renier. Anyways, we'll find that out. We'll look at that. Maybe we'll get some more information and pepper you with his comments. Who knows? Just to bear a little bit.
We can resume on that by all means.
Okay. No, fine. Good. We're on Isla, and there are distinctive flavors, and we're getting away from Tat Wild now, but there are distinctive flavors between the different distilleries, and we tend to know them in this group. If Nick was here, we've tested ourselves fairly well with what we have, and even with independent bottlers, we're fairly good at distinguishing one from the other. And I just want the panel to chirp up a little bit. What makes an Ardbeg, because we're in Ardbeg this week, what makes an Ardbeg an Ardbeg, and how do we tell? Because Kent, you have grooves, but we've all had grooves, and we all know it's Ardbeg. There's no way I'm thinking that's a Lacheg. I know it's not a Bruichladdich. I know it's not a Lag. How do we know the difference between a Ardbeg and all the other ones from Isla out there? Or let's say a Highland Peat. Let's go for it. So Kent, I'll throw you out there, and then Nick and Dave, if you want to add your 2 cents, because you have a very good bottle in front of you as well.
Ardbeg just tastes like an Ardbeg. It's really, I know it's one of those things that you taste it once and then you realize that, well, let's differentiate to say a Highland Park, which is more of a sweet peat, right? The Ardbeg is more of a medicinal peat,
but not as medicinal as Lefroy, or yeah,
but I find Lefroy is usually got a little bit more harsher, where like the peat in Ardbeg, it slaps you in the face. It's just straight up peat. Lefroy has got a little bit of a bite, a bit of girth to it, right? So there's a definite difference that way. And actually, I had Cheryl come and taste the grooves because it's been some time since we've gone into this bottle. So it's got a little oxidation happening, and it's like, holy cow. This is like a flower that's just opened up, because when we originally opened this bottle, I found it a little bit flat for an Ardbeg, and now it's become an Ardbeg, like it's come into itself. Yeah,
that's good to know.
It was quite amazing to go into it. It was like, okay, so this just needed some time, and I'm wondering if because I don't know their process. I'm wondering if Ardbeg works on this, where they build a product, put it in a bottle, and then as it oxidizes, it comes into itself more. So, because I mean, I have some bottles of, you know, like the 10, which is pretty much a go-to, but that 10 will, you know, I'll open it and it'll sit on my shelf for 6 months and before we drain it, right? So it's getting oxidization, it's opening up, and we're getting into that flavor profile that we know to be Ardbeg.
So are you asking if they distill with the knowledge that it's going to oxidize and try to
build on that,
something with the flavor that it's going to become, as opposed to what it is now out of the barrel?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Like I have a couple of Ugadels. I ended up opening 2 bottles. So I opened one and it kind of got put to the back of the shelf. And then I opened a newer one. And we taste them side by side. And I mean, we're talking within 2 years difference of bottling. And there was a distinct difference between even the 2 Ugadels. So.
And you're not thinking it's a batch difference. You're thinking it's a time
straight up oxidization over time.
All right. Well, let's answer that one. Does anyone think that when you're distilling, you're thinking about what it's going to taste like 6 months, 2.5 years, 5 years down the road after it's gone to the halfway point? Do they consider that? That's a good question.
Aren't they looking at it more from the sense of once it's in the bottle, it has to be to them a product that is completely drinkable by the consumer?
Recognizable and drink. I think they want that consistency.
That profile that's they're going for, whether it be an Ardbeg or something else. This is our profile. This is what is consistent for the product. And as soon as we put it into the bottle, then the consumer will know what it is, and it's drinkable from day one in bottle.
Well, going down that throat process, both grooves and drums are not a typical Ardbeg profile. They were both brought to us under the assumption that we're going to make a cocktail out of it. So why would Ardbeg do that if they're putting it up against their 10, their Ugadel, the Anno, or any of the other core releases, right?
But it's Committee, which is their one-offs. It's not their core range.
Again, though, but you're processing it and bringing it out as a bottling for cocktails, not for a straight sipper.
Who says?
I think they want the bottle. I think they're thinking of how it comes out of the bottle initially. But I think this is really neat to think about as well, because it's still a blend. It's a blend of their malts at the distillery that they're bringing to the table so that it tastes the same all the way down. It tastes like a 10. But how they mix this, and their blenders that have the fantastic noses that are able to give us that product, I don't know if they're thinking behind the scenes, because I mix these and it's going to be a different mixture every year with whatever stock you have. They're going for what it is up front. I don't know if they're thinking about what it might taste like in the future. And Andrew, Andrew, I want you to finish this off if we could. But Dave,
aren't they trying to, if they put out, I don't care which distillery it is, if they call it a 10-year-old, don't they want that 10-year-old to taste the same this year, last year, 5 years ago? It's like McDonald's. We want that burger to taste the same when it's coming from the national brands. Can they do it? I think it's probably not. And we've done it before where we've had 3 different
vertical tastings prove that.
Vertical tastings prove it.
Yeah. Different woods, different
does change, but they try. But Dave, will it taste different from another bottle? If I open 2 bottles, let's say I open my 10 and Nick opens one of her 10s that we have sitting around, and in 6 months, if they're from different batches, different years, will they taste the same? And did they think about that?
I can't see how they couldn't taste different.
Okay. Andrew.
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, when the whiskey goes into the bottle, that's the signature of the producers.
Yep.
They sign it off at that point, and after that, it's your responsibility. And of course, whiskey does oxidize when it's in the bottle. And I often worry about rare. You see these, go to a bar, you see this rare malt, colossal price on it, and there's maybe 1/8 left in the bottle, and you wonder how long it's been sitting there. And, is it a good buy? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think there should be a lot more bottling of more expensive malts in half bottles, actually, and even quarter bottles, because it makes a lot more sense in terms of getting the product at in its best state. So I don't think they're thinking, how will this be when it's half a bottle, assuming that half a bottle has been open for a year and a half. That's just, they've signed it off by then, and there's nothing they can do about that. The whole point about consistency is a very interesting one, because you're interested in comparisons with the wine world, and this is, this is a fundamental difference between the whiskey world and the wine world. In the wine world, nothing is meant to be consistent. Things are always different. Every new vintage is different. Every vineyard is different. People are always searching for difference, except at the biggest brands of all, where you're looking for consistency. If you buy a bottle of Echo Falls or something, you want consistency there. But the moment you move up the quality pyramid with wine, you're looking for individuation and nuance and difference. Whereas when you buy distillery iterations of single malts, yes, you do want consistency. And in fact, I often think that the distillery own versions of their malts are not fully appreciated for that, because when you start wandering off and hunting around in the merchant bottlings and the single bottlings and the Scotch Malt Whisky Society bottlings and all of those, you can discover some absolutely mind-blowingly good things, but you can also come across some real crass mistakes and errors, and those mistakes can be expensive. Whereas when you buy the distillery's own iterations, which have been put together by blenders, there is a consistency there, and that is the best place to go looking for distillery character, in my opinion, is in those particular iterations, because that's what they're trying to achieve through that consistency year in, year out that Dave referred to.
So you mentioned wine, and I listen to the wine guys all the time, and they always say, well, the grapes for 2018 weren't as good as they were in 17. And so it all goes back to the grape, where you can't take this back to the malt that year wasn't that good, because the blenders take over, and the blenders try to blend it to taste like it did last year and the year before and years before that. And look at Crown Royal. I mean, they're probably one of the best blenders, for sure, in North America.
As I understand it, when distillers buy malt, they have a spec. So you meet the spec or you don't meet the spec. If you don't meet the spec, you don't buy the malt. So the whole kind of vintage difference thing doesn't really exist in the same way at all as it does for wine, where you're drinking grape juice from a particular place in a particular year.
Yeah, because they sell every year of grapes that's going on.
Yeah.
And everybody can talk about the year, the vintages and that kind of stuff. So I just found that interesting about the wine guys. They talk about what year the grapes were and how the season was and all that kind of stuff. You don't hear that from the distillers.
It's completely different.
Yeah. More sun, more rain, different years create different crops.
Well, I think it's every industry. We sell what makes the best story.
Yes. Yeah, we do. But let's not take away from the question, because Kent, I think that's a fantastic question that I would like to bring to other people that distill or master blenders. We can bring this to Dr. Don here in Canada and other place, and maybe Al from Dave.
Sure.
Do they ever consider what it's going to be like after it's sold? Or is it you put it in sunlight, it's going to destroy it, I don't care what you do. If you bring it down to the last quarter, I don't care what you do. I wonder if they ever think about it in those terms, or if anyone's done. I'm sure someone somewhere has done research on this. I'm sure of it, because
I think our best bet on that
so much. But we haven't thought about this before, and I haven't read an article on this yet. And I read every article possible. Nick finds new ones for me every once in a while, which is nice too. But we read a lot, and that's never come up. So in the past 8 years of me reading articles and the whiskey books, zero. So fantastic question. Way to go, buddy. But Nick, let's go back to you, because we didn't think, or I want to hear about your thoughts on Ardbeg. What do you taste? How do you differentiate it so easily? Because I can too, but I want to know what you're thinking.
I was talking to one of the brand ambassadors. I know about the profile, and they described it as herbaceous and fruity.
Yep.
Having those sherry notes that are very distinctive, and a smoothness, and it's the smoothness from the nose right to the palate. And he said one of the best descriptors is walking along the seaside or face planting in the mud when playing rugby. And you know what? It's such a vivid description. You're like, okay, yep, you know exactly what that tastes like.
Okay.
But yeah, no, there's something very distinctive. I don't find them medicinal. When I think medicinal, I think Lagavulin and Lefroy. There's a sweet, smoky to the peat, and that sweetness carries through. It's just Ardbeg has this also a funkiness to it. It's distinctive. It's not a bad funk, but there's just something that you're like, that's Ardbeg. And maybe it's how they peat and have the husks go through for that little extra ppm component. It's just so distinctive.
And we both get a lot of funk on Lecheg, and that's the first.
That's different funk.
It's very funky and very different. But I can agree, there's a little bit there, and I had a hard time with this as well. But I'm going to go back. I'm going to quote Andrew, and then Andrew, I'll see if you still agree with this statement. So page 77. There's no spirit nip in the new make, no matter how aggressive one sniff. It's smooth off. There are fruity notes there too, and a sweet cereal harmony. It reminds me of a pair of powerful engine quietly purring. So that's you. Page 77. So do you still agree with that? And do you have a memory of it? Because you don't have a bottle of it now, but can you picture an Ardbeg in your mind? Do you think?
Yeah, I can picture an Ardbeg in my mind. And well, the answer is I haven't had a chance to sniff the new make for some years now. So I can't disagree or agree. But I think if they're doing a good job, it will still be the same. I'm quite surprised to hear you say funk about Ardbeg, because to me, it doesn't have funk. It is a kind of purity.
Okay.
There's a sort of finesse there. I mean, I can see the herbaceousness.
That goes with funk in me.
Perhaps the kind of smell of cold mud or cold clay or something like that. I can see that in there as well. But it's not one I would ever describe as funky. It has a sort of purity and a refinement. Almost a kind of austerity compared to some of the others, the wilder ones, the Lefroy, the Lagavulin, and even Bamor as well. That's what even though it's quite peaty. So it's a combination of quite intense peatiness, but also this purity and this refinement and this almost austerity to it.
Okay.
I always felt it was a malt I sort of admired more than loved. I had respected more than warmed to.
Okay.
Whereas I always warmed very easily to both Lefroy and Lagavulin.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's a neat comment. I'm going to keep quoting you though. Page 78. It would be a tragedy if Ardbeg was to abandon sherry aging altogether, as the gratifying richness of this sweetly autumnal dram underlines. So I wanted to ask this question of the panel. What is an autumnal dram to each of you? And we'll finish off with Andrew and see if we have the same kind of idea of what an autumnal dram is. So Dave, what are you thinking on?
I was going to say, don't start with me. I was just picking up my phone to look that up.
All right. Okay, I'll go to Kent, and you look it up and come up with a good name.
I didn't do my homework.
That is a very unique word. It's not one that I would say sits in our dictionary for everyday usage. And I'm kind of torn on answer to this, because today's answer is going to be different from tomorrow. That dram for me changes depending on my mood. So
definitely.
I don't know where to go with that, right?
Well, I'm going to throw just a couple words out there, and maybe it sparks something, or the complete opposite. So autumnal, I'm thinking smoky. I'm thinking the weather's changing, something to warm your hearts, warm the cockles of your hearts. As you're going from summer, and a summer dram for me is something very fruity, very, very red fruit forward for me. And for the autumn, I'm thinking the different spices, as opposed to a Christmas dram, which is heavy sherry for me, where I'm thinking Christmas cake. So I'm throwing that out there. Say whatever you like. So, Dave, do you have it yet or no?
Oh, definitely. Am I muted? No. Okay.
Nope, you're good.
This Dark Cove was the first peated whiskey I ever had, and all I could think of is sitting in front of the fireplace when the snow's blowing and the wind's howling.
Okay.
Like it just.
So a winter dram for you.
Yeah, I keep looking at it sitting on the bar over there, thinking, yeah, it's not the right time.
Oh, okay.
I would drink it all, but it's not the right time. Like I've got to,
Yeah.
No, I
always
like
the right time for an art.
Okay. Nick, how about you?
Seasons, not so much. It's more my mood of the day, because there's been days where it's 30 above and you get that big smoky, peaty, heavy whiskey and you got a fire going and it's just beautiful and it's perfect. And you're like, okay, let's toast a marshmallow, and my life can't get any better than that moment. But it's more about what I'm feeling versus what the weather is. Because there's been cold, bitter, wintry days, and I'm drinking super light, fruity whiskeys because that's what I'm feeling. Or maybe I'm eating fruit that I want to pair with that. And to me, it's more about me versus what's outside in the weather. That's a secondary or third level consideration.
Okay. My moods change distinctly in the seasons. I've noticed that with myself. But having said what you did about the marshmallow, here's an idea. We have a cup of Ardbeg. We toast our marshmallow. We catch them on fire. We dip them as they catch on fire into any of the PD ones we're going to talk about from Isla and come out with that. Let's try that.
Let's do that.
It's on camera. We got to do it. Andrew, your idea of an autumnal dram, please, kind sir.
Sure. Before I come to that, just quickly on sherry, sherry can do something wonderful to whiskey, and I think every distillery should always have sherry expression somewhere in there.
I agree.
It's just a fantastic marriage. Okay, autumnal. I'm gonna reference a great Canadian here, pianist called Glenn Gould. I'm sure you all know Glenn Gould. Yeah. Glenn Gould recorded 2 versions of the Goldberg variations, and you can buy the 2 versions on one single CD package. One was recorded when he was very young, and it's very showy and very pianistic and very flamboyant and super quick. And then he also recorded one when he was much older. And when he was speaking about the 2 versions, what he would always say about the second version was that it had this sense of autumnal repose. So I think for me, autumnal implies repose, and it also implies a kind of serenity and a kind of harmony and acceptance, a kind of orchestral, all-encompassing quality. So an autumnal dram, I think, should be something quite well-aged, probably. Warm, rounded, very harmonious, nothing sticking out of it, nothing edgy, no elbows at all. And something very calm and accepting and serene. That's the kind of things I would be looking for in an autumnal dram. And then I put Glenn Gould's second version of the Goldberg variations on, and then I'm in heaven too.
Excellent. Any other comments before we go forward with this? We're okay with autumnal and your own descriptions of it? We're all good. We're not going to convince each other of anything. That's fine. I'm going to go to page 52. I'm reversing back. So let's go to the descriptions of the areas. You can almost feel this legacy of loss on O. So OA. It's, for me, when I read that, I don't know if we have a connection to an area that's lost most of its population. We don't really have ghost towns here. Now, I don't know if the rest of you have actually been to a place like this. I know in Alberta there's some that might have been like coal towns that have closed down and no one's there. But it's a foreign feeling for me. And it doesn't seem like it's terribly foreign on Isla. It seems like there's quite a bit of this where it was so important and so primordial in the whiskey world and then close down where you have sections, large areas that people have left completely. Can any of you on the panel, Andrew, the panel, do we have an image of something like that? Does this hit home for you? Can you picture it?
Frank Slide. Yeah, Frank Slide for me. It's so Frank Slide actually is southern Alberta and was primarily a mining town. Were digging into the mountain and ended up having a massive rock slide that overnight wiped out the town.
Okay.
Right. So you go there and the history behind it. It's also kind of links back into our whiskey days because that same mountain actually used to have tunnels through it for the rum runners going down to Prohibition in the U.S.
Okay.
So
maybe they're responsible for it.
Well, they say it was from an upper mine that caused the slide. They hit a crack. Okay. But I mean, that's people way above my pay scale.
All right. Dave, Nick, Andrew?
We have a lot of those places in Alberta. You drive across the prairies and you come across these empty farmhouses, this barn in this lone field. Yep. You've got this broken down fence and the wheat is just blowing in the wind and there's an eeriness to it. And having been to Isla, there's some of that similar eeriness where there's not another soul about. And you may hear that odd bird, but it's in the distance and it almost intrudes onto the quietness that exists in that spot, and you're sort of woken up and you're like, oh, I do hear another sound. It is eerie. It is quite something different.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you very much, Dave. Or on your travels up to the Yukon, have you seen any?
Well, I go back to the history of brewing in Montana and towns that popped up due to mining, and they always had a brewery, but they're gone now. And you can go, and today you can actually see some of the ruins of some of the old breweries that were there. And for me, that was so interesting of seeing this crossroads, and there's a building there, and yeah, it was a brewery. And I don't know where to go with this, but
is it eerie, like Nick said, or peaceful, eerie?
Well, you get out of the car and it's really quiet, and like you're listening to the birds. The wind might be blowing, and it's interesting. I can just picture all those people back then.
The bustling of it, and then all of a sudden, not so much.
It's here and then it's gone. And I see that more in the U.S. than I do up here in Alberta. The ghost towns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrew, in the south of France, anything like that you can think of? Because my travels.
There's a lot of rural depopulation in France, actually, and so you can find pretty empty Languedoc villages now. But just to go back to Isla, we'll perhaps talk about this when we come to the history chapters. But Isla was very thickly populated with people making a living off the land in the 19th century and earlier. And they're all gone. A lot of them have gone to Canada. A lot of them went to Canada. And, there is no strength of population in that sense anymore. There's big seasonal rises and falls, and obviously service industry and whiskey and so on. But the thickness of the people and the land is definitely finished. And you feel that very clearly in the O, this particular rump off the bottom, which is, I remember going there after dark, and there are one or two cottages left. You just see the little lonely light and the vast emptiness all around it, and you think, wow, to live there, that takes a bit. That's a bit special. Just one final anecdote as well to share with you. I remember, I did a lot of walking on the island as much as I could. I love walking, and I remember coming to a ruined cottage one time and having a look around inside. And there was wallpaper on the walls peeling off. And I peeled off a bit of this wallpaper, and there were 6 or 7 layers of different papers, one on top of each other. And I remember thinking, wow, every one of those wallpapers came over to the island on a boat, and somebody went to some shop or other and looked at the wallpaper and said, that's nice. We'll have that in the cottage for the new wallpaper. And took it back to the cottage and put it up on the wall. And that happened 6 or 7 times in this particular cottage, long abandoned now. And that was very moving to see those wallpapers. Somebody had troubled to send to the island, and somebody had troubled to buy and choose and put up on the wall on top of the previous wallpaper and freshen the place up. And now it's all gone.
And think about the generations that went through, and was the wallpaper very different one from the other? Grandmother to daughter to you know.
Yeah.
That's Andrew, right. I thought you were talking about my house for a moment there.
Not any wallpaper there anymore. You've destroyed the walls and redid them all.
It's all gone. Yeah, we completely gutted our house, but the very peeling the layers of time back, it was so interesting. We just finished our living room, which had paneling on it, which from the 70s, right? But behind that, there was 3 different paint codes you could see going right back to stuff we would never ever think to paint our walls today. But in that time snippet, you know, going back to 70s, 60s, whatever, you know, these were popular colors of the time, right? And that generation was like, we're with it. And stuff we're putting on the walls now, in 30, 40 years, they're going to think the same of us, right? So it's like an onion, peel the layers. Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you look at the time, that's all we have today.
Wow.
That's it. Another hour. Done. Thank you. It's been a fantastic afternoon. A great afternoon. Been looking forward to this, and I'm not disappointed. I'm really happy. Thanks to the listeners. Thanks to the panel. Dave, Kent, Nick. It's been an absolute pleasure spending all this time with you all. Special thanks to Andrew for coming on with us this first week. And hopefully we haven't scared you away and you're going to come back to the next part because you never know. As always,
I'll be back.
We'll hold up the glass. Here's to good company. Everyone around. Here's to good whiskey. Here's to good books. This one right here. That one right there. Here's to good books. And here's to good conversation. So, and here's to seeing you all next week, Saturday, April 10th, 2021, at our new time, noon Mountain Daylight Time. And this is 8 o'clock CEST, CEST, Central European Standard Time. Is it Standard Time? Standard Time. For our Whiskey Book Club's 10th book review and the second edition of Whisky Island, A Portrait of Islay and Its Whiskies, with author, as you can see right here, Andrew Jefford. As a final note, if you don't want to miss a minute of future episodes, click like and subscribe. And we're going to see you all next week, I hope. Have a fantastic rest of your week.